Hey guys, I just got back from LVO this week where I managed to go 5-1 with my 18 Tyrant Guard. In this video, I'm going to briefly go over each of my games and tell you how the Tyrant Guard performed against each army I faced. Let's get into it. Alright, first up, let's discuss the list. With the points changes since I last used this list in October at the Battle Pub Barfight GT, I ended up with 20 extra points. There were about 5 points added to Lictors since then, but then the Tyrant Guard all dropped by about 10 points per unit for a full unit. So I ended up with 20 extra points, which I used to make two very specific changes to my original list. This means I kept it Synaptic Nexus for my detachment just because I was familiar with it. Even though Synaptic Nexus actually only had a 31% win rate for that weekend, there were only 11 wins out of about 36 games, which is pretty awful. And if you take out my games, it's really only a 20% win rate. So I would not recommend sticking to Synaptic Nexus if you're not super sold on it. I may be moving into Assimilation Swarm moving forward, but that's for another conversation. With this list, I took my Hive Tyrant as my Warlord, Neuro Tyrant with the upgrade, so he had the upgraded Flamer weapon, the Swarm Lord, 20 Hormagaunts, a Biovore, and Exocrine is one of the changes. I upgraded the Haruspex to an Exocrine, added a little more range support, kept both Lictors, a Psychophage, and the 2 Tyrannofexes with Rupture Cannons, and also the 3 units of 6 Tyrant Guard. And each unit had a different weapon loadout. I kept the Bone Cleavers with the Tyrant, the Crushing Claws with the Neuro Tyrant, and the Scything Talons always went with the Swarm Lord. And I'll get into how each of those weapons performed in each game as we go through it. Oh, the other change I made to my list was upgrading the 20 Termagants to 20 Hormagaunts. So, let's see how they did. Game 1. This game was a great way to start off the event. LVO was absolutely massive and overwhelming, but my first opponent was the right opponent for me to play into Game 1 because he was so incredibly friendly the entire time. And he was there to have fun. Most people came with a super hard list ready to just destroy everyone they came in contact with, and it was the most competitive event I've ever been to in my entire life. But this opponent was there purely to have fun, and he showed it, and he was just the greatest guy to play against. He took a Blood Angels list with mostly jump pack infantry and just a couple of vehicles, and it was not a great matchup into me, just because Marine bodies die really quickly to my army. I started out just sticking my Neuro Tyrant right out where he could have the most line of sight, so that as soon as a unit popped their heads out, I was able to get some Overwatch out. It was mostly just death companies and characters, and AP1 chainswords don't do too well into toughness 8, Tyrant Guard, and reinforced Hive Node. So even with the nerf to reinforced Hive Node, I was able to use it pretty effectively since he didn't get a whole ton of charges in each round, and I only really needed to use it occasionally. The nerf overall did affect me, but not too much in this game. A couple other takeaways are that number one, Mephiston is a beast. That guy just would not die. You can see in the little circle picture here, he was surrounded by the Swarm Lord and his Tyrant Guard, and I think I had a few other things getting in there, and he would not die. He wasn't killing too much either, but this guy just wouldn't drop. The other big thing is just that me having the Neuro Tyrant out, that Overwatch every single turn was just nuking Death Company left and right. So against Marine armies, having that Neuro Tyrant out and with a good line of sight is really a deterrent to Marine armies. And I was able to clear the board, wiped my opponent, but he was actually able to score decently well for having very few units left, and ended up with a Tyranid victory 100 to 57. Winning that game was just really exciting for me, and it was a great way to start off the event. So I went into my next round really excited to see what I was up against. And then it was Sisters of Battle. and I do not have a good record against sisters. They seem to always have my number and kick my butt every single time. I've always struggled against their miracle dice because getting to choose when you're going to pass a 4-up invulnerable or choose when you're going to end the life of one of my monsters, and I don't really have anything I can do about it, is kind of rough. I know that they were nerfed, so we didn't see a lot of sisters at this event, thankfully. But Miracle Dice still kind of felt broken when my opponent kept rolling 5s and 6s to get them with his little squads on the objectives. I don't remember what they were called. I'm not super familiar with all their units, but there were certain units that were battle line units, I believe, that if he had them on the objectives, he was able to roll a 4-up, and if he got it, that would be his an extra miracle dice that he would generate for the turn. So he was generating 2 extra miracle dice every turn and just kept rolling those 5s and 6s, which was really helpful for him. He also had some kind of upgrade on one of his characters, I think, that helped him get either more or better miracle dice. And so that was really tough to deal with. He also played the detachment where if they get wounded or damaged or below starting strength, they get bonuses. And he had a Palatine in this list that was able to get up to damage 4 and had all kinds of rerolls. And when it went into my Tyrant Guard, she alone soloed the Neuro Tyrant and the Tyrant Guard with it, just by herself. Some, I think, 50-point model just nuked the entire squad, and that was really brutal. And it kind of set the pace for the rest of the game. Let's see, Morven Vol went in and took out the Swarm Lord and all of his bodyguard, and I think also took out the Hive Tyrant, if I remember correctly. And those Arcoflagellants also went into my Tyrannofex at one point. His shooting was able to drop my Swarmlord down. Oh no, combat did the Swarmlord down. And the shooting took the Tyrannofex down to about 2 wounds, but somehow it had gotten battle shocked. And the last thing my opponent was able to do on one of his turns was throw those Arcoflagellants into my Tyrannofex. I wasn't too worried about it. No AP, 2-up armor save, toughness 12. But they were still able to get 4 wounds into it, and I had to make my saves. My Tyrannofex was sitting on 2 wounds left, and I managed to fail 2 out of the 4 saves on 2-up armor, and he died, and then he blew up, and then he did 1 mortal wound on Deadly Demise to the Arcoflagellants, and then did 5 mortal wounds on Deadly Demise to my nearby Hormagaunts, and then what was worse was he did 5 mortal wounds to the Swarm Lord and killed the Swarm Lord. So what should have been a stronger flank ended up being no Tyrannofex, no Swarm Lord, and a weaker squad of Hormagaunts, and it was brutal. It also didn't help that Vol and her unit just seemed to pass 4-up invuls all day long, and so my Tyrant, I was getting good rolls, I was getting good hits in, but they just would not die. And my Tyrannofexes kind of whiffed into all the vehicles, so I couldn't take out any of the vehicles, and was getting shot by Meltas and whatever the other tanks are, the Castigators. They had both big gun options, and they were really brutal. So this list was super painful to fight against. I think I was tabled by turn end of 2 or early in 3, and it was it was brutal. My score was so low because I didn't have anything on the table to score points for like 3 turns out of the game, and it was over pretty quickly. And that was my one loss. Everything that could go wrong in this game did go wrong, and I am still figuring out what to do against sisters. So if you have some advice for me, I would love to hear it. Give me your tips and tricks against sisters, because I need that help. Alright, let's move on to another win so I can feel better about myself. Going into Necrons, this game was super tight. It was the not yet nerfed, I think it's called Star Shatter detachment. And these guys were really tough. The Silent King is basically invincible when he's got -1 damage on him, and he's also getting, I think it's an improved reanimation protocols. and I could not take this guy down. But I went into this knowing that I wasn't going to be able to take him down in the first place. So I tried to just do some board control and hold the objectives, and it was a really close game all the way through. Those Doomsday Arcs hit really hard, but they don't take a hit back too well. They're only, I think, T9 or something. The 4-up invulnerable save kept one of them alive for quite a while, but the first one dropped pretty quickly, and that was able to limit the firepower coming at me. The destroyers were pretty cool. He had a unit of the Scorpec destroyers, then he had some other, I don't know what the ones are called, they look like wraiths, but they were pretty cool to fight into. The Neuro Tyrant was really good at just blasting them off the table though, and the rest of the list I don't think did a whole lot. It was mostly the Silent King and the Doomsday Arcs that were really hitting hard. And everything else I was able to take out with some kind of shooting or overwatch. The Swarm Lord's blast, flame attack also. I'm sorry, I forget the names of everything. But his torrent weapon was able to take out some things as well, which was really helpful. So this game was really close. My opponent scored really well, despite me trying to keep him off objectives. And he was able to do really well against me. It came down to the very last turn. Definitely a tight game, very cool opponent. And I was able to take the win with 81-74. And that was Necrons. I knew they'd be a tough matchup going in. They absolutely were. The list was pretty brutal. But my goal was just to throw everything in the middle and out OC the Silent King on that objective. And that seemed to work. I was able to hold the middle objective and take that game in the end. So that was Necrons. The Tyrant Guard in this game, they did really well, but they were mostly just taking damage and keeping the Tyrant and Swarm Lord alive. They didn't do too much damage on their own in this game. So none of the loadouts for their weapons performed particularly well or particularly poorly. They just kind of did what they were there to do, which was soak up wounds. The Tyrant and Swarm Lord did some damage, but once they got into the Silent King, they just didn't really do anything. If they did do damage, he recovered it, and it was just kind of a wash. But between the Swarm Lord, the Hive Tyrant, and the Tyrannofex sitting on the center objective, I was able to hold it down and get ahead on primaries, which gave me the win. So let's go into Game 4. Alright, so Game 4, I was going into Deathwatch, and this was the first game on Saturday morning, so I was pretty happy to have gone 2-1 the first day, and wasn't sure what I was getting myself into with Deathwatch because I'd never played them before. My opponent was, again, super nice. He went over how his army worked, and what things he could go uppy downy with, and the firepower that was in his list, and also told me that a lot of these units, or all of these units, I believe, had a majority toughness 6. So they were pretty beefy to chew through, and they had some incredible mobility and firepower. And what I found out throughout the game was that they basically kill what they want. When this game started out, it kind of felt a little bit like my game against Sisters, because I just started losing units. I had put my Neuro Tyrant in a good position to overwatch from the beginning again. And as soon as he took Overwatch from that Neuro Tyrant the first time, he decided he was going to end it. And his very first turn, he popped out and just destroyed the Neuro Tyrant's unit like it was nothing. And that showed me the firepower that the Deathwatch have. I am not surprised that Deathwatch ended up winning LVO. They are a brutal army. They've got a lot of tricks up their sleeve, and they hit so hard. So he had a couple of big units that he kept redeploying and shooting me with, which was pretty brutal because I couldn't really hide monsters or big units like Tyrant Guard and a Swarm Lord from those units because they could always get an angle. I did my best to put myself in inconvenient places and make him deploy where he'd have to shoot at non-optimal targets. And my Tyrannofexes managed to hold on for quite a while despite all the firepower coming their way, and kept me on a couple of objectives, which kept me in the game, even though I was getting all my units ripped off the board in pretty short order. The Whirlwind started off on his first turn just obliterating my Biovore, which was really painful on the scoring front. There were a lot of things that I was having a harder time scoring just from having fewer units and losing my Biovore before I even really got to use it. I also really wanted my Biovore to survive because I wanted to start putting down spore mines in places that would make it hard for him to redeploy and shoot me from different angles. And so not having the ability to put those spore mines down and keep him out of my backfield was really rough. I was behind most of this game, but at the very end, I went second in this game, and I was able to pull off. I think this was the game where I went second. I ended up on my last turn being able to sit on 3 objectives and score a bunch of points on primary. And there were a couple of secondaries I was able to score. And so my last turn was a really big point swing in my favor. And I was behind the whole game, but managed to pull it out on the last turn with an 85-79 win. Deathwatch are terrifying. I don't remember if my... Oh yeah, I think the Tyrant and his Tyrant Guard got into combat once, and they were able to take some stuff out. The Bone Cleavers did okay against the Marines, but I didn't really get into combat with a whole lot else. He was able to keep moving away from me or redeploying away from me, and I just couldn't get there. And so a lot of the game was me trying to sit on objectives and score secondaries, and him trying to shoot me off objectives and score his own secondaries. So in the end, I couldn't really tell you what works good as far as weapon loadouts because I got nuked off the board in this one. But a few monsters were able to hang on long enough to score me some points and take it 85-79. And that was Deathwatch. Let's go into Game 5. Alright, so Game 5 was against Drukhari. And I hadn't really played against Drukhari. I knew they had some tricks up their sleeve and they could hit really hard. I think this was the Reaper's Wagered attachment or something like that. Maybe it was the Sky Splinter Assault. I think it was Sky Splinter, actually. But I hadn't had a lot of practice into Drukhari, or any practice for that matter. But I'd heard on a video, and I can't remember whose video it was. If you remember, please put it in the comments. But there was a video where somebody had made the comment that if you're playing into Drukhari, you just have to disrespect them and throw everything you've got at them. And don't give them the chance to build up those pain tokens. So I took that advice to heart, and I got first turn. So he was able to hide everything from my shooting, and I just threw everything straight up the board. I advanced everything. I decided if my monsters weren't going to be able to sit back and shoot and benefit from heavy, I was just going to advance them as far as possible and sit on objectives and try to block him out. So this was, I think, the ritual. We had to create the objectives. The only starting objective was the one in the center of the board. And so I was trying to get there with as much as possible, as quickly as possible, and also get that Neuro Tyrant into good Overwatch position. And the Swarm Lord I moved on the other side of the board so he could cover that lane of fire with his Overwatch as well. Because I knew my Overwatch would be really good into Drukhari units. Unfortunately, he had, I think it was 3 units of Beast Packs, which have a ton of wounds and don't really care about my Overwatch. And he also had an Archon with Incubi and a Raider that also don't mind Overwatch because you can't Overwatch them. And so he, on his first turn, ended up popping out the Incubi and the Archon and charging straight into the Swarm Lord and did a ton of damage, took out all the Tyrant Guard and almost killed the Swarm Lord too. Swarm Lord fought back, killed 5 of the Incubi, and then I think it was on his turn he was able to hop back into the Raider, and that was really frustrating. No Overwatch, and then being able to pop back into the Raider was really brutal. I was able to... How did he get back in there? Maybe he had me tied up with the Beast Pack, and I don't think I was able to consolidate back into combat or pile into combat with the rest of his incubi. I don't remember. They had tricks, they had shenanigans, and they were able to get back in that raider. I ended up popping it with the Tyrant effects on my next turn and then shot all of the incubi to death. And then the Stormlord and the Archon ended up duking it out later. And Lilith Hesperax ended up coming out to the middle of the board to play with the Hive Tyrant and his Tyrant Guard. And they took out about half the Tyrant Guard there, and then the Stormlord was able to hurt her unit. And the unit still survived because 4-up invuls in combat were ridiculous. So I ended up just falling back the Tyrant's unit and shooting them with everything else that I had there, including, I think, the Psychophage and Exocrine and Tyrannifex. And I think the Tyrannifex ended up shooting into Lilith when her bodyguard was dead, and that was a little bit of overkill. My opponent also had a Tantalus, which is not in the picture, but it was super cool in this game. And it came in, did a little bit of damage, and had a big unit with an Archon that popped out of it. And they had some really good firepower, and were able to do a lot of damage to my Tyrant Guard with my Neuro Tyrant. But Neuro Tyrant and Overwatch ended up taking out a lot of things on that side, and really limited his mobility there. And then my other Tyrannifex was able to shoot down the Tantalus, which was very cool for me. My opponent was super cool, one of the nicest guys I played against at the whole event, and he actually comes to Texas sometimes, so hopefully I will be able to see him again at another event. This game was really cool. The Drukhari hit really hard, but they do tend to fall apart once you start getting into them, and that's kind of how this game went. I was able to take out the beast packs, and once his screens were gone, I was just able to get into the rest of the army and start taking things apart. He did plenty of damage to me, don't get me wrong, but the game was pretty decisive with a 100-68 victory at the end of it. So let's get into Game 6. Alright, Game 6 was one of the tougher games that I played, and I only ended up taking this one because my opponent made a couple of critical mistakes. My opponent was playing Black Templar, and he told me beforehand what each unit could do because I didn't really have experience into them. He had Helbrecht in a unit in an Impulsor, and then he had a Captain with another unit that was in another Impulsor, I believe. And he explained that basically whatever Helbrecht's unit or this Captain's unit touches just gets deleted. And I said, okay, well, that'll be interesting. We'll see how that works out. And he wanted to start out just screening my guys out as best he could with his scouts and his infiltrators, and the scouts had an ability to redeploy as well. So he ended up just getting them out of the way and popping them around the table to score points throughout the game, which was really frustrating. I kept killing like one scout a turn, but at the end of the game he still had a single scout left, and I just couldn't finish off that unit through the whole game. They were surprisingly difficult to deal with. Helbrecht and his unit were sitting back in one of the Impulsors. He also had a Calidus assassin, and the Calidus kind of sat behind the wall in the middle, the ruin in the middle, on his side, and just used its Lord of Deceit aura to really make things tough for me. Fortunately, I had a Tyrant and a Stormlord over there, so his stratagems were also hard to pull off, and I did have that CP reduction from the Tyrant, which helped me get a few things going. Most importantly, I was able to do my Reinforced Hive node a few times, which was really helpful. My Tyrant also had the upgrade for -1 damage, and the two critical errors that my opponent made were, number one, he kept several of his vehicles in reserve, including a Vindicator and one of the big speeders. And so, and one Dreadnought as well. So a lot of his firepower didn't start on the board, which allowed me to play super aggressive on my first turn and just run up towards all the objectives. And again, setting up that Neuro Tyrant to Overwatch really well. And Neuro Tyrant Overwatch was really strong. He did engage it with, I think, an Impulsor at some point, so I wasn't overwatching anymore. But it was pretty helpful early on. Also, the second mistake that my opponent made was that I had the Swarm Lords unit in the center and the Hive Tyrants unit in the center, and they do look very similar. I pointed out, who had what upgrade, which one was the Tyrant, which one was the Swarm Lord, which unit of Tyrant Guard was with each character, etc. And the Warlord, my Warlord Tyrant, has a different colored rim on his base, and just to identify him easily as the Warlord. But they do look incredibly similar, and my opponent got them mixed up. He didn't tell me he was mixed up about them until he got into combat, and he had made his charges, and he threw his captain and his unit first into the Tyrant, and managed to destroy all of the Tyrant Guard pretty quickly and easily, but the -1 damage on the Tyrant kept it alive. And he thought he had charged into the Swarm Lord and didn't realize till his captain was making attacks against my Tyrant that he was attacking the one guy with -1 damage in my army. And because of that, the Tyrant survived and was able to kill his bodyguard, and I think ended up taking out the Tyrant, or the captain as well. Or someone, or maybe I got into the combat with something else on my turn to take out the captain, I believe. But the point is, my Tyrant survived the charge from the captain's unit, which he did not expect to happen. And so even though I lost all my Tyrant Guard with him, the Tyrant did live, did hold the objective, and did kill that bodyguard unit, and eventually on my turn killed the captain as well. So he realized that was a mistake. He got pretty frustrated, not with me, but with mistaking the units. He did tell me that I did, clearly state, but it definitely threw him off. And then he didn't have all of his units on the board to capitalize on my overextending my units to try to keep in the game and keep some threats forward. And so it took him until the last turn to really take out a lot of stuff. He also had a couple of turns where his Vindicators didn't do too well. He just couldn't get the damage through for whatever reason. And because of that, I was able to stay on the objectives. He did plenty of damage to me, don't get me wrong. Helbrecht did get in there eventually and do what he does. And so I ended up going down with, I didn't have much left in the middle at the end of the game. I think he actually cleared out the middle by the end of the game, which was where all 3 units of Tyrant Guard and all characters were. And I think one of the Tyrannosaurus got in there also. I only had a couple of models left at the end of the game, but by that point I had already gotten so far ahead on points that he wasn't able to catch back up. He did do a secret mission where he had to control, I believe, 3 objectives that were not in his deployment zone, and he was able to get that extra 20 points at the end of the game, which brought him up to 80. But he had fallen behind, I think, on secondaries and primary earlier in the game, and so I was able to still pull it out with a 97-point victory in Game 6, giving me a 5-1 record at LVO. These were the hardest games I might have ever played, and the competition was brutal. This guy was one of the best opponents I played against. He was so smart, but he just made a couple of mistakes that ended up costing him the game. I think this would have gone very, very differently had he identified the Swarm Lord and Tyrant correctly, and if he had just kept his other models on the table. I think either of those choices would have made this a very different game. But as it was, I was able to pull out the win against Black Templar for a final record of 5-1. And I ended up, I believe, in 100th place overall at LVO, which I didn't expect to be all the way in 100 for 5-1, but then I remembered how big and massive this event really was. I think there were close to 1,100 people playing, biggest LVO ever. It was such a cool experience. So, just as a wrap up, there were such cool armies there. The whole event was, it was just really exciting to be there. The preview night was really fun. They had all these cool Tyranid things out, and I enjoyed that. I thought that was a good omen for my bugs for the event. And then I was able to see a lot of cool people there. I was there with my friend Russell Tassin, and he was playing for Art of War. And there were some other really cool people out there, other Tyranid players. I was able to meet Matt Evans for the first time, and he did fantastic at LVO. Matt, if you're listening, congrats, dude. It was really cool to meet you, and you did really, really well. Thanks for taking the Tyranids up to the shadow round there. And we there were also such really cool armies there, such really well painted armies. I saw Natalie Hills Chaos Knights, and this this Great Unclean one that was just so cool. I loved her paint schemes, so I put those pictures in there as well. And it was just an amazing event. I would love to go back next year if I can make it. So moving forward, what is next for my 18 Tyrant Guard? This season, I am not sure if I will stick to 18 Tyrant Guard. I found out at LVO that there are so many armies that are very good at killing 18 Tyrant Guard. My my army got wiped out more games than I'd like to remember. It happened with great frequency and ease, it seemed. So I may not be sticking to 18 Tyrant Guard. I might mix it up a little bit. I have some thoughts on Assimilation Swarm. I would have played Assimilation Swarm at LVO because I think it's a much stronger detachment right now since the changes to it, and since the nerf to Reinforced Hive Node being like Armor of Contempt. And so I would have done that at LVO, but I didn't really have any practice. I had all of 2 practice games since I played at the Battle Pub Barfight GT in October. And so I wanted to just stick to what I was familiar with rather than go into LVO with possibly stronger attachment but no familiarity with it. So I think I am going to start trying to get some RTTs in and play a little bit more frequently. And I will also be trying to make some more content, so stay tuned for that. If you like to hear about Tyrant Guard or Tyranids in general and want to see where I'm taking it, then please stay tuned. If you like this kind of content, if you enjoyed this tournament report, please like my video and share some comments if you have any thoughts or questions. I'd love to respond to them. And if you haven't already, please subscribe. I'd really appreciate it. And I'll talk to you guys in the next one. Thanks.